Good morning, church. You got them warmed up, Jay. Good deal. We're glad to see you this morning. We have visitors in our audience. Thank you for being part of our service. Hope that you'll stay around so we can meet you after services. Hope you'll come back and be with us whenever you possibly can. As has been announced here a few weeks ago, the fifth Sunday of April. This is a year that has five fifth Sundays. Now, say that fast. Thank you. Say it fast. Keep saying it. There you go. As fast as you do it. But, of course, we're having one next week. We hope everybody will come. But it has been designated in April as Friends and Family Day. Well, we want all of our friends and all of our family to come. We want them to have invitations. So there are in the back invitations, and we can print more in an envelope, and you can write a little note on the back of the card. Just tells them that they're invited, when it is, and what the times are of services. And you can write a note on the back and tell them that you want them to come, and you can address it and send it. Now, here's what we want from you besides that. You say, that's enough, preacher. No, it's not. We want everyone to bring at least 2 addresses of people that you know that are some way, shape, form, fashion, either kin to folks here, looking for a church home, folks in the surrounding community, or just folks that used to be years ago associated with River Road. And I want you to bring 2 addresses. We're going to compile the list. We're going to get some folks to help us address all these. We're going to send all those out as well. If folks get more than 1 invitation from us, that's fine. You know what that means? They're loved, appreciated, and wanted. And so it will be fine. But everybody bring in 2 addresses. Please do that within the next couple of weeks. That list will be compiled, and then those invitations as well will be sent out pretty quick, ASAP, pretty quick, and so that we can really get word out that we're going to have this on April the 30th. But we're glad that you're here this morning and hope that this lesson proves beneficial and helpful to you in many different ways. The question of why is often asked. It's asked at every turn. You go to the funeral homes and you see the families there that have lost loved ones, no matter whether their loved one is someone of age or some young person. The question is asked, why? Why does God allow this to happen? Why did this happen at all? You go to the hospitals and you see folks and you ask them the same thing, or they ask the same question, why? Why am I sick? Why is my loved one sick? Why can't we beat this? Why isn't God listening to our prayers? Why isn't God attending to our needs? Why isn't God changing this situation? Why were we diagnosed this way? And why doesn't God change it? You go listen to your neighbor and talk to your neighbor, and they're having financial issues, and they're wondering why. Why can't it be changed? Why can't this financial burden be lifted from me? Why isn't God listening again? They're having problems with their family, and they're also asking the question, why? Why is this suffering going on? And ultimately, when we look at the idea of suffering, we may say, well, suffering comes about, first of all, because sometimes we make the wrong choices. We suffer because we made the wrong choice. We chose A when we should have chosen B, and because we chose A, the consequences of the choices that we made produced problems for us. Sometimes we suffer because of the wrong choices of others. Folks make the wrong choice, and because they made the wrong choice, we end up suffering for it. We end up hurting. We end up in pain. We end up in sorrow because of their choices. Sometimes we suffer because of the wrong choices of former generations. We suffer because former generations made choices that were within the realm of making, but because they made the wrong choices, we suffer because of those choices. And so we suffer, and we suffer really many times because of choices But we ask the question, why? Why doesn't God deliver us from those choices or that suffering and pain? Why doesn't God remove the burdens that are from us? Why doesn't God simply alleviate the problem of evil and the problem of pain in our life? Let me submit to you this morning that maybe we're looking at it wrong. When we're looking at it from the standpoint of why, maybe we should look at it from the standpoint of blessings. You might say, preacher, I just can't do that. I understand. I understand as a boy growing up that every church service I was taken out at least once and whipped. I mean, I told Mama I became a preacher to get away from her. I knew she wouldn't get up in the pulpit. At the same point in time, too, every time I was whipped, I wondered why. And I've gone through suffering just as you have. And sometimes you wonder, well, but why? And I think maybe I'm looking at this wrong. Paul was in jail in Philippians chapter 1 and verse 12. And he says, I want you to know that the things that happened to me have happened rather for the furtherance of the gospel. He was able to take a step back, if you will, and to look at the problems that he was having and say, okay, they're not good. He wasn't glorying in the fact, hey, I'm in jail, all right. But at the same point in time, too, he was simply saying, there's some good that's come out of this. There's some benefit that has come out of this. And you need to know it. And so we look at our problems, we look at our sufferings, and we often say why or ask the question why. And maybe we should say, why not? You see, I believe that there are benefits in our suffering. Don't like them. Don't get me wrong. Don't like suffering. Don't like pain. Don't like problems. I like nice, smooth sailing. I like if you will, for the river or for the lake, I like for it to be calm. I like for the river or lake of life to be calm. But it doesn't work that way. And so I ultimately have to then say, well, what good can come out of the problems that I'm having? Well, let's just look at a few. We don't have time to look at all of them, but let's look at a few. First of all, pain helps us emphasize really our need for God. It brings us back to the point in which we are. You see, we're not really sufficient in ourselves, are we? Isn't that what Jeremiah wrote in Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 23? Oh, Lord, I know the way of man is not in himself. It's not in man that walks to direct his steps. We try to think that we are. We believe in many instances that we are. And oftentimes, even in our pain, we pull back and say, I've got to answer this for myself. I've got to figure it out for myself. But oftentimes, pain drives us to our knees, doesn't it? Pain causes us to look outside of self and to look above. Pain causes us to realize that our strength is not in ourself. Job asked that question in Job chapter 6, verse 13. Is not my strength within me? And the answer that Job was even understanding as he wrote that question was, well, no. If you read the context. No, your answer is not within you. It's within God. And so the psalmist in Psalm 18 and verse 6 would say, in my distress, I called upon the Lord. Well, what did he do? He heard and he answered. Now, mind you, you may not get the answer that you want. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul asked the Lord not once, not twice, but 3 times to remove his thorn in the flesh. That thorn in the flesh, whatever it was, have no clue, whatever it was troubling Paul. Now, Paul said that it was, if you will, a humbling effect. Because if you go back, he says, because of the abundance of revelation, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, lest I should be exalted above measure, he says, through the abundance of that revelation. You see, God saw me as a great servant, Paul says, and because God saw me as a great servant, he gave me all this revelation, and he did all of that great church work. Go back and read the book of Acts. But he said, I had a problem. I had a pain that I needed to be alleviated. And I asked God, and he didn't. But he did answer. and say, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. And so Paul's resolve was then, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities. In other words, it's all right. I got it. I'm going to get through it. But I'm going to get through it based upon God. And so, the beloved prophet Jonah, when he said that his soul fainted within him in Jonah chapter 2, verse 7, do you know what he's doing? He's praying to God. He's in that great fish that the Lord provided. And yet, what is he doing? Well, you think, I can't get out of here. I'm going to drown. I'm going to die. I'm going to die right here. But he's praying to God. My soul fainted within me, and I turned to my God. There's a lot of folks that when they begin to struggle, they do try to pull inward. But many take a step back and turn to God. And haven't been thinking about God, haven't been trusting in God, haven't followed God, haven't talked to God in weeks, months, and years. And so oftentimes then, what it does, even with those that have a good relationship with God, is it makes that relationship stronger. It makes that relationship better. Why? Because all of a sudden now we understand that we can lean upon God. And in leaning upon God, trusting in God, and leaning not on our own understanding, we acknowledge Him, and He brings it to pass. And so, one of the great blessings and benefits in the midst of my struggles, in the midst of my problems, is that I get to build my relationship with God. It helps, secondly, to develop my spiritual character. Spiritually, we all would like to be stronger, right? No matter where we are in life, no matter where we are spiritually, we always want to be stronger. Why? Because the Bible tells us plainly this: grow. The Bible never says, you're all right, stay where you are, you don't have to grow, you don't have to do anything, you are really good. The Bible says grow. Now, growth takes time, growth takes patience, growth takes putting things into action, growth takes learning. It involves all of those things. But our pain and our suffering helps us develop spiritually. Where did we say that Jonah went? He went to God. But what was he doing? He was praying. He was praying to God. He was being built spiritually because he was building his relationship with God through prayer. Hezekiah. In the book of 2 Kings, the 20th chapter, Hezekiah is king over Israel. And Isaiah the prophet comes to him because Isaiah had been given a message by God. Go talk to Hezekiah. And here's the message I want you to give him. Isaiah goes and he gives him the message. Hezekiah, get your house in order because you're about to die. What do you think the first thing Hezekiah did? Turned his face to the wall and he prayed to God. He prayed for deliverance and God gave him some 15 more years. But it's all because he turned his face to the wall and prayed. Manasseh is another in 2 Chronicles 33. Manasseh seems to be an arrogant individual. Manasseh is taken off by the Assyrians. He's actually, if you will, here he is king, but now all of a sudden he has a nose ring in his nose, and it's not for decoration. It's so that they can put a chain in that nose ring, and they can lead him off. They're going to make sport of him, and they're going to kill him. Syrians were not the most pleasant of people. And Manasseh really had very little, if any, regard for God. Praise. You see, all of a sudden, in looking up, we realize, we can talk to God. And so we build ourselves and we build that relationship with God through prayer. And that's what problems and pain and suffering does. It drives us to our knees. And so we thank God then for the avenue of prayer. Knowing that He hears, knowing that He listens, and knowing that He answers. David, in 1 Samuel 30, you might recall that he and his army went off to help some folks. And when they did, they left wives and children behind. And when they got there, David and his men were told, we don't need your help. Go back home. And when they go back home, guess what? The wives and the children have been killed and taken off. David's men want to kill him. In 1 Samuel 30 and verse 7, it says, David inquired of the Lord. In other words, David prayed. In the midst of our suffering, we have that wonderful avenue that we can go to the Father who can take care of us. That Father who is watching over us. The Father who is willing to help us through. But it builds our spiritual character not just through prayer, but through Bible study. You remember what the psalmist said in Psalm 119, verse 67? Before I was afflicted, I went astray. And then he says in verse 71 of the same psalm, he said, not only did he come back to God, but he said, I learned your word. Now have I read your word. And in that psalm, the longest chapter, if you will, of all the Bible, the psalmist talks about the power of the word and the importance of the word and the value of the word and how that it helped him get through. You see, all of a sudden we realize I got time to not only talk to God, but I got time to listen to God. I got time to see what He said. And in the midst of our pain, what do? We dig deeper in those verses that are about pain and about suffering. And isn't it interesting that in the Bible, you find people that had problems, right? You find, like David a while ago in 1 Samuel 30. You find Jonah in the book of Jonah. You find Elijah discouraged in the book of 1 Kings. You find Adam and Eve thrown out of the garden. You find Noah trying to talk to people and get them to listen to what he's saying, and all the time building an ark for people that had probably never seen rain and are laughing at him. You don't find too many people that had no problems in their life in the Bible. So you begin to delve deep into those verses and see those stories and see them from a different side and a different angle and a different approach. And so you see the blessing of suffering, that it builds and it builds spiritual character. But also, our pain and our suffering keeps us from being attached to this world. We love this world, don't we? I enjoy it. Enjoy my family, my wife, my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandbaby. I enjoy you. I enjoy being with you all and talking to you all and having fellowship and trying to help you grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ as you try to help me do the very same. I like the activities of the world. I enjoy my job, study and teaching and preaching and meeting people. I enjoy this world. Not the biggest house, not the biggest car, not the biggest bank account, but I enjoy. And I'm thankful for what I have. And I'm sure you as well. But we grow attached to this world. And we need to remember that what Peter wrote in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11, that I beseech you as pilgrims and sojourners to abstain from fleshly lust which war against the soul. Don't grow attached, Peter says, to this world. Why? Because you're sojourners and pilgrims. You're travelers passing through. You're not here to stay. You're missionaries, if you will. You're coming through. You're coming through this time. You're going to touch the people that are around you. You're going to see and you're going to help the people that are with you. But at the same point in time, too, you're just passing through. And so as the song goes, I'm just passing through. Our treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. Our pain and our suffering helps us realize this world don't have all the answers. This world's not everything it's cracked up to be. It's not everything that we thought it to be. We're just passing through. We're sort of like the old rabbi. Someone went into his house, just they were visiting, and they passed through his house. And when they got there and looked in his house, they noticed that off in the corner were some books. There was one bench and one small table. And they looked and they asked the old rabbi, they said, "Where's your furniture?" And the rabbi said, "Well, where's yours?" And they said, "Well, we're just visitors. We're just passing through. Ours are at home." And the old rabbi said, "Mine too. I'm just passing through." This world is one that we get attached to. It's one that we grow accustomed to. It's one that we dearly love and we think about. And yet, while the suffering of this present time is not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed in heaven, I know that I have that which is eternal waiting on me. You see, this world is not forever. While we're just pilgrims passing through, we know that it is that which will last but for a little while. We have, as it was said of Abraham, we have no continuing city, but we do seek one which is to come. And while Paul would write in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, he would talk about in chapter 4, he would talk about our light affliction, which is but for a moment, works in us a far more exceeding eternal weight of glory. While we look not at the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen, for the things that are seen are what? They're temporal. They don't last. But we do know of those things that are eternal. And so he goes on in the 5th chapter in verse 1, he says that we know that if the earthly house of this tent is dissolved or taken down, we have a building of God, a house not made with hands, eternal. Have you caught all the wordplay that Paul is giving? The temporal, the things that don't last, the things that are here today and gone tomorrow versus the eternal. And then he goes on in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verses 2, 3, and 4 and talks about how that we want to be clothed not with mortality, if you will, but immortality. We're looking for what is yet to be because we know what is yet to be will not end, but what is here will end. One day our suffering will end. One day it will pass. One day we won't be concerned about how much money we have, how many aches and pains we have. We won't be concerned about loss. We won't be concerned about death. Why? Because all of that will be swallowed up. There'll be no more pain. There'll be no more sorrow. The no mores of Revelation 21 verse 4 hold sweet promise to us as Christians, especially in the midst of suffering. Because we know that God has an eternal home waiting for us. And while we may suffer and we may hurt and we may have difficulties and problems and heartaches, we understand that there is that which awaits us that is far better. And so we live looking, waiting, anticipating, and longing for that white city that John saw coming down. So our troubles really benefit us, but they also equip us to be compassionate toward those that are in pain. You see, we're not always in pain. You know, we've used the old illustration, the old adage that there's always a storm in our life. We're either headed towards a storm, we're in the midst of a storm, or we're coming out of a storm headed towards another one, right? That's just life. In other words, Everything's all right, then everything's not all right, and then everything's all right again. And so if you look at it from that standpoint, 2/3 of your life, it's good times. You're either headed or you're recovering. But it's that third. Man, it's painful. Man, it hurts. Man, it creates problems. It creates anxiety. It creates depression. It creates discouragement. It creates worry. It creates doubts. It creates fears. But then when it's over, and we see, if you will, the plan and the plane more plainly, and we're able to rejoice, we find others that, guess what? They're not in those 2/3 of their life. They're in that 1/3. They're in that storm. And the winds are blowing. The winds are not just barely blowing. They are truly hurricane force winds. The winds are blowing and the tide is coming in and the ship is being tossed, and not just tossed a little bit, but tossed back and forth. And we don't know if the ship may even sink. And when we are in the midst of that, what we need is a little help. Now, admittedly, sometimes we don't want help. The difference between cats and dogs. Dog hurts, what does he do? He comes to you. He wants a little help. Cat is hurt, what does it do? It runs away. It runs away. I don't need any help, don't want any help, don't want you to touch me. The reality is it does. When we suffer, we're able to look at all of that in people's lives because we've been there, done that. We've got the hat, we've got the t-shirt, we've got it all, we've experienced it. Now, we have to go to them. We have to understand, first of all, that as by individuals that have been told by God, Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, to serve one another, that we approach individuals understanding they may not want to talk, understanding that they may not want to listen to what you have to say. They may want you to listen to them, or they may simply want you to sit with them. Job's friends in the book of Job were really good until what? They opened their mouth. That week that they sat with Job, who had gone through and lost everything, looked terrible, physically was terrible. When they came to him and they sat with him, they were great comforters. But when they opened their mouth, Job says, you're miserable comforters. Sometimes you just need to be quiet, but you hold the hand and you pat and you soothe and you simply say, I'm here if you need me, and I've been through some things. Blessed, Paul would say in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Blessed to the point of what? Oh, blessed those who have been comforted, for they shall comfort. We have the opportunity to serve, and so pain helps us realize that others need our help. And we're able then to shed our problems and all of a sudden jump in and see what we can do to help others. You might say, I don't want to get involved in people's lives. I don't want to get involved. But friends going through suffering need us. And they need our experience. And they need our expertise. Oh, I'm not an expert. I don't have a counseling degree. I don't have a degree in helping people. God just calls us to love one another. And if we love one another, the experience will come and the help will be extended and the comfort will be felt as you help them get out of their storm and get to that other 2/3 of their life. But then suffering also helps us to see the real worth of things. What you got in your pocket? Let's see. I got my hand in this pocket. I got some keys. They'll get me in this building. They'll get me in my office. They'll get me in the church office. And they'll get me back to the baptismal rooms. I got a pocket knife. Pocket knife's not worth much. If I were to ask Ken to how much is this knife worth, he said, throw it down. It's not worth anything. It's really not. It's very cheap. Sharp, because I sharpened it, but it's very cheap. And I've got some mints. Why? Well, sort of self-explanatory, isn't it? What you got in your life that it's really worth something? Oh, now you're like all the rest of us, you're getting all your things together because you got to fill out your income tax. Yay, raw. You're getting all of that information together. All your assets, you're looking at all of them, what you're worth, what you're not worth maybe. You're looking at those things and you have to ask yourself, I'm thankful for them. I'm appreciative of them. But really, are they really worth anything? One day they'll all be burned up. One day they'll pass. One day they'll be gone. One day they won't be important. And I know physically, yes, we need all of those things. Don't get me wrong. We physically need all those things to get through life. But in the great scheme of things, earth holds no treasures, but perishes using. And so, what do? We look and see the real worth of things. Pain causes us to stop sometimes, and it causes us to see life in a whole different perspective. And when we come out of that storm that we talked about a while ago, all of a sudden the birds sing a little sweeter and the sun is a little brighter and the clouds are a little bit more beautiful and the scenery is more vibrant. Why? Because all of a sudden we don't have the weight of the problems that we just got through suffering. We don't have them anymore. It's gone. And so we see, what's really important is my relationship with God. What's really important is where I am with God. What's really important is that I get to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. I don't like problems. And I would venture a guess to say, you don't like problems. But at the same time, too, we can take the approach of letting those problems beat us, letting those problems defeat us, letting those problems overcome us, letting those problems even driving us to our early grave. Or we can take them, learn from them, grow in them, realize that in many ways that they are a blessing. For no chastening for the present seems to be glorious. But afterwards, this is Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11, it works the peaceable fruits of righteousness. And thankfully, I can lift up my eyes into the hills, from whence comes my help. My help comes from the Lord. Psalm 121, beginning in verse 1. Are you His? Are you following the Lord? Are you leaning upon Him for your problems, your troubles? Are you leaning upon your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ? If you're not a New Testament child of God, you can repent of your sins, confess your faith, be baptized in Jesus Christ so that those sins are washed away. Are you living faithfully, or have you let the problems separate you from God? The answer is plain and simple. Won't you come? While together we stand and sing.